Hello everyone, just a wee Tuesday reminder that Celtic are champions. We may be the best team in Scotland, but Ange clearly isn't going to just stop there. He's already given us the whole bigger, better thing about next season. And when you look at the way he performed this season for us, after being written off by so many when he first came to the club, you really wouldn't want to doubt anything the man says. So we will assume that Celtic will come back bigger and better next campaign. Players will join, but we've covered that already over the last couple of weeks. And we'll do a hell of a lot more between now and the start of next season, or I suppose the end of the transfer window. Today's video, though, is going to focus on the current players who could leave the club. And today we're going to ponder who will be on that list. So, first of all, let's just bring you up to speed and up to date with who is leaving Celtic. And bit of breaking news for you, Tom Rogic is leaving Celtic. I know, it's hard to come to terms with. Another bit of breaking news for you, Nir Bitton is also going to depart the club. Again, bit disappointed. I would have liked to keep both at the club. I think they could have offered us something next season, but it seems like their hearts were set on moving away from the club. Don't think we've really had any news about either yet with regards to who they're going to play for next, so we'll wait and see what happens there. But it's fine. They both leave the club as heroes, which I think is probably just kind of one tier down from legends, although some may actually argue that Tom Rogic is a legend given the big amazing moments that he gave us in his time at the club. But Bitton and Rogic, or Rogic and Bitton, are away. Away from them too, it's all about moving on some of the players who didn't feature quite as much under Postecoglou last season. Now, watching the team play last season, and given that we signed all of these brilliant players and we saw marked improvements in the likes of McGregor, Taylor, Ralston, who else improved massively from the season before? You kind of do forget that we did have quite a few stragglers in the squad, players who weren't fancied by Ange, didn't really make any impact at all last season, but were still in training every single day. So we're going to take a look at some of these players today. First of all, on screen there, you've got some of the players who played the least amount of minutes last season. We're only talking about first team players here, so I'm not including development players, the likes of Dane Murray, Joey Dawson, even Owen Moffat, because I look at these guys still as being very much B team players. We're talking about first team players who weren't fancied by Ange last season. Top of the list there is Christopher Jullien. He only played 16 minutes. You've got the likes of Karamoko, the two Sheffield Wednesday boys, Idiguchi, and then some of the longer term players, the players who were signed mainly by Neil Lennon there in the rest of this list, and guys like Liam Scales and James McCarthy. We'll come on to most of these guys on this list. We'll just run our way through. By the way, after Adam Montgomery there at the bottom, you go into players like Matt O'Reilly and Rio Hattati, guys that will be around next season under Postecoglou, no doubts at all about that. So if we start with Chris Jullien, only 16 minutes played for Celtic last season. He is out of contract a year from now, and it's widely felt, I think, by people that he's going to be leaving the club this summer. In a recent French interview, he said that he had been fit since January and wanted to play more. People will probably look at those comments and think it's the equivalent of a baby chucking the toys out the pram, and I get that to an extent. But I've not got a massive problem with that. I would much rather Christopher Jullien was really unhappy at not playing than just sitting on the bench and being content with picking up a wage at Celtic. We've had so many players like that in the past, and Jullien's clearly a player who likes to play football, and he's not been getting that opportunity. He was doing a lot of waving on Trophy Day. It was actually a moment well after the trophies had been given out. I think Celtic were just on their second lap of the pitch. In fact, they would have been because the family was there, and Jullien with his family came over and kind of applauded the North Curve, and obviously there was loads of other things going on at the time, but I think there was a wee moment between him and the Celtic support, and both parties kind of realised, yeah, this isn't going to continue for much longer. Now, I may be reading far too much into that, but I took it from that Jullien won't be kicking around next season. And, you know, with a year to go, the best we could probably hope for would be a couple of £1 million. We may even be fortunate to get that much given the recent injury problems he'd had. Given that we paid £7 million for Jullien, I think it's fair to say he would be one of our top earners as well. So getting him off the wage bill a year early would not be a bad move either from the club, and would no doubt save us a good bit of money. I think all in all, just to conclude on Jullien, if we assume that he is leaving, I'm not particularly gutted about him going. I don't think it's a departure that's going to set Celtic back at all next season. But I think I'm also pretty thankful for what he gave the club. I always thought that he was a pretty decent defender when he wasn't playing against Lyndon Dykes, that was, or even Kilmarnock on an artificial surface. I think people read far too much into those games. I think in Europe he was a really good defender for us, and he scored some massive goals. Lazio, Rangers, need to say any more. So I think kind of both parties move on and say thanks, but I'm going to assume that Christopher Jullien is going to be away, and if we can sign a centre-back who's maybe more of an Ange Postecoglou defender, then I think everyone would be happy about that. Now, Karamoko Dembele is up next. He's out of contract this summer. I'm unsure exactly when the end date is. Various websites, the likes of transfermarkt.co.uk, say that it's the end of May, aka today. So if that's to be believed, when it hits midnight tonight, then Karamoko will no longer be a Celtic player, which is a bit bizarre to think. It could be the end of June as well. Now, I'm not going to pretend that I know anything here, but he didn't make the matchday squad under Ange for any of the final 9 games of the season. Remember, he came on at Tannadice. I think he maybe set up one of the goals that night, maybe the last goal for Giakoumakis. Well, he didn't get in a matchday squad for the rest of the season after that match. And I always think that's pretty telling with Ange. Ange would never come out and really slag a player off publicly, but I always think that when they're not making the matchday squad and they're fully fit, which we assumed Dembele was, then there's something up there. And when a player isn't fully committed, the minute a player isn't fully committed, they no longer feature under Ange. So we'll see what happens with Dembele. I would reckon that he's probably going to leave this summer, which would be a shame, given that he was such a hyped young prospect all of those years ago. I think he was 7 months old when he got his debut for the development team all those years ago. So it would be a shame if he never made any sort of impact really for the first team. But as I said, with Jullien, I think Celtic would be just fine. I think that goes for any players on this list. I mean, Celtic won the league last season without contributions really from any of the players in today's video. So if any of them were to move on, I think the club would get on just fine. Liam Shaw, he didn't enjoy a particularly great time at Motherwell on loan in the second half of last season. We may find out more about him in pre-season. We may actually also do a video on Liam Shaw looking back at how he got on with Motherwell, maybe chat to a Motherwell fan as well to find out how he got on there. But I think he'll be back in pre-season training, trying to impress Ange. His fellow ex-Sheffield Wednesday teammate, Asazi Urigidi's future is less certain. He was also on loan in the second half of last season, but in Belgium, trying to kind of follow in Jack Hendry's illustrious footsteps at KV Oostende. They had a purchase clause in his deal, which kind of signalled that Celtic didn't really see a future for Urigidi at the club. He finished the season as a regular for the Belgian top-flight side. I think they finished 12th in the league. So we'll see what happens there. Probably not got a future at Celtic, but I think Liam Shaw has more of a chance to make an impact next year, but I'm not exactly expecting him to, if that makes sense. Player I am expecting to forge his way into the first team and certainly put in some sort of a contribution for his next year is Yosuke Ideguchi. Ange reckons that Gucci will be a strong contributor for Celtic next season. So he's only on this list and in this video because of his lack of game time last year. But you've got to remember that he did have an injury as well after that terrible Alloa challenge. And he did, of course, only arrive in January as well. Right, from Ideguchi to Bolingoli and Barkas, they both played 180 minutes for Celtic last season, which seems far more than you would think. Bolly's 2 incredibly random appearances, which is not spoken about nearly enough from last season. Remember, he played randomly in the Livingston defeat away from home and also in the Motherwell win at Fir Park. Just plucked out of thin air, in at left back, and then like not making the matchday squad for like 15 games either side of those matches. So that was bizarre, but I guess that just kind of reminded us of the state of our squad last year. Barkas started the Midtjylland home leg when he basically chucked a goal into his own net, and the St Johnstone Boxing Day match when I think I was the second choice Celtic goalkeeper that day in Boxing Day, because everyone else was unavailable. So Bolly is out of contract next year. Again, he'll be on a decent wage, and we could do with shifting some of that, even if it is another loan. Barkas has an extra year in his contract, so his contract is up in the middle of 2024. Again, he was signed as a first-team goalkeeper. You've got to remember that. He was signed as this big kind of successor to Fraser Forster. Didn't work out well at all, did it? But we ended up with Joe Hart. But Barkas will be on a decent whack. We weren't able to move him on last year at all, despite like several reports at various points saying that he was like close to agreeing a move to like Greece and Turkey and all of these places. It never happened, so I would have fears about that a little bit, whether we're going to be able to move Barkas on. Now, sticking with the I'm trying to be diplomatic here, the Neil Lennon signings that didn't work out like we would have hoped. We've got Albion Ayeti and Ismaila Soro, who fall into the same category. It was hoped that both players would make a big impact. They actually both had decent times early on at the club. Ayeti, like, I remember Ayeti signing and thinking, this guy's brilliant. He scored like 4 goals in 5 games, brilliant finishing. It hasn't worked out for either. Both still have a couple of years left on their deals, just like Barkas. So again, loan moves away from the club may be needed. But we have to get these guys out of the club next season, in the nicest way possible for their own careers. You want them to be playing. There may be players in there. We've seen players leave Celtic in the past, not with a great track record at the club, and go on to have great careers. I mean, you think of, just off the top of my head, Timo Pukki's an obvious one that comes to mind. Even someone like Charlie Mulgrew leaving the club, having to come back and then having a good Celtic career. I'm not saying Albion Ayeti's going to come back in 4 or 5 years and be a star for us, but you never know. You want these guys to move away and further their careers, free up wages for us, and everyone is happy. I guess it's just trying to find a buy-in club for players who have fought badly and have pretty decent wages and probably hefty enough price tags, given that we paid probably about 13, 14, 15 million for these 4 players all in. We're then left with players who I think are quite interesting. Guys who featured at stages last season. Some of them had, real key moments, big goals, big assists for us at key moments, but weren't really first choices under Ange at any time. Now, we're talking about 4 players here: James McCarthy, Liam Scales, Mikey Johnson, and Adam Montgomery. I think loan deals for the latter 3 there would be good. I'd love to see Mikey Johnson going out on loan to another Scottish Premiership club, a Hibs or an Aberdeen. I think that's been mooted in the past. It's obviously never come to pass, but I just think he needs to get his confidence back. Now, I know there's a lot of people that have now come to the conclusion that Mikey Johnson just isn't good enough for Celtic, and I respect that, because if you're looking at what he's done in the last couple of seasons, you'd maybe agree with that. And I'm going to sound like I'm back in 2018 when I say this, but I firmly believe there is still a player in there. I think we've seen that in the past. He scored big goals for us. He's competed for us in Europe. We just need to get his confidence up. And I think if you're happy to write off a season in terms of Celtic, get him out on loan, season-long loan at Hibs or Aberdeen. I think that could resurrect his career and he could come back to Celtic and be a player who could contribute for us. Now, again, I don't know whether he's ever going to be a starter. I don't think he's ever going to be at the level of Jota or Dyson Maeda. But Mikey Johnson is a player who could contribute for Celtic. We just need to get his confidence back up. And he strikes me as the kind of guy that it's not going to happen at Celtic. He's trying too hard now. There's too many fans on his back, and I understand why they're on his back, but it's not helping him at all. Get him out on loan, as I say, to a Scottish Premiership club, a team that tries to play good football, even like a Dundee United or someone like that. But I think Hibs would probably be the ideal choice given the size of their park and the fact they're meant to be a top 6 team, and resurrect his career. Same goes for Liam Scales and Adam Montgomery, they didn't feature much really in the second half of last season at all. Montgomery was out on loan to Aberdeen, and they are likely to find themselves even further down the pecking order when we do sign a new left back. So I'll be looking to get both probably out on loan. I think Liam Scales, that there's something to work with there. Again, just a bit more development needed. Maybe just needs to settle in a little bit more. And yeah, Premiership, I mean, I know we could loan them down south. Maybe a club like Fleetwood Town under Scott Brown will be taking some Celtic players next season. But I just think that, keeping these guys in Scotland is always the advantage. Even just away from the players themselves, it strengthens the opposition when they play against the rest of the league, but not against us. So I always think that's a thing we should be doing more often. Finally, James McCarthy, an interesting one. As we know, he's contracted, let me get this right, until the year 2085, might be 86, I think, at Celtic. We gave him that lengthy contract. So moving him on may be difficult. He's the one real signing you would look at from last season in terms of first team players, discounting the two Sheffield Wednesday boys, that hasn't really worked out under Ange. And I don't think he's been quite as bad as some people have made out, but it's clearly not been a successful signing so far. With a full pre-season under his belt, he didn't get that at all a year ago. Maybe he could still be an important player for us, and I wouldn't write him off completely. But the big question has always been, from the day he signed really, is he an Ange Postecoglou player? And I think the jury is still very much out on that. My gut is that McCarthy will stick around next year and play a bigger part for Celtic. I don't think he'll ever be a first choice centre mid, but I think he can certainly play a bigger part than last season. And I think Ange rates him. I don't get the impression Ange doesn't like him at all. I think wee signs like Ange putting him on Trophy Day so he could get a medal is a sign that McCarthy is liked by Ange, and I think he's quite a big presence in the dressing room. So hopefully he's a player who can again resurrect his Celtic career, and maybe play a couple of games here and there. Had to get that in. We're back tomorrow when we're going down under.